Okay, hello and welcome to today's video where we're going to be talking about why it is so difficult to get out of our systems. Because the way that we are being conditioned to value what we value, and the way that we are being conditioned to see the world the way that we see it, is keeping us part of the system. It's keeping us defending the system. It's keeping us in a state where we may not even recognize and see the system for what it is. Because it is truly as though it is the waters we are swimming in. Like that expression that they talk about how fish, if you ask a fish, how's the water today? They're going to be like, what water? Because it's something that's all around them all the time. So much so that they don't notice it until something goes very, very wrong with it, until something goes very, very out of the ordinary, until there's some sort of disturbance or interruption. The fish doesn't know that they're in water. And this is very akin to how we are in our systems and in our culture and in the things that we want to change, right? That we're going to talk a lot about this today, but there are a lot of reasons why changing the system and creating something new is so incredibly deeply challenging, because for a lot of us, we don't recognize the ways in which the system is hurting and harming us, because we are being conditioned to see the hurt and the harm and the ways that we are being treated in ways that are non-humane and that don't align with our humanity. We have been conditioned to see that as something that's wrong with us. We have been conditioned to see that as the normal way and just what we're supposed to deal with. And part of the reason why, again, it's so difficult to change these things is because we've also been conditioned that anything different, that if we were to change things, if we were to adjust things, if we were to make them different, that they would only get and be worse. So even if we are seeing the systems that we're living in and how they're harming us, we don't fight for them to change. We don't fight for them to be different, because there are so many layers of indoctrination and conditioning that tells us that if we were to change something, that if we were to fix it, if we were to make it different, that the only place we could go from here is down. That this is the best we can expect, this is the best we can hope for. So even if it's not great, it's still the best thing we can do. And then on top of that, we need to understand that one of the biggest reasons why we have such a hard time with understanding our systems, seeing them for what they are, and then actually shifting them, is because we are being conditioned to value what we value. We are being conditioned to strive for what we strive for. We are being conditioned to see certain things as the solution to our pain, as the solution to why we are suffering, to have certain ways that we are programmed to pursue things by the very people who supply our basic needs on a day-to-day basis. We are being dictated our value systems and what we are trained to pursue, what we are trained to see as good and bad and right and wrong and valuable and not valuable, by the people who own the means of production and who control who has what, when, where, and why. Okay? And this is something that when we can wrap our minds around this, we can have a better understanding and we can have deeper compassion for why shifting our own mindset is so difficult and why shifting the cultural narrative is so difficult. Because the people who are in power have so much power because they control the things that we need, right? It's not just that they're controlling our minds through media and all of these things as a fun thing that they're doing on the side. It's they are doing it via the avenue of being the ones that provide for society what society needs to function. And we have been so divided and in so many ways conquered through that division that we have very little recourse in terms of demanding a new structure from the people who, again, we feel, and in many cases it is absolutely true, can deeply impact our safety, can deeply impact the way that we can move through this world and feel like we're going to be okay and get our needs met. And that is something we really need to validate and acknowledge and look at when we're looking at changing our societal values. Okay? So again, fundamentally, bottom line, what does our society teach us to value? What is the system? When we're always talking about the system, and the system is bad, and the system is evil, and the system is corrupt, what do we actually mean by that? What is the system, and how is it bad, and how is it corrupt? What I'm talking about when I say the system, okay? When you're listening to my content, when you're listening to my lives, you're listening to my mystery school, when you hear me say the system, what I mean is the cultural values that shape the way we consume, the way we produce, and the ways that we interact with one another and ourselves. Okay, the system is the general way of life that most people are indoctrinated into as being, this is how life is. This is how work is. This is how leisure time is. This is how we are supposed to communicate with one another. This is what a normal way of socializing is. This is what a normal way of dressing is. This is what is societally acceptable as what we should pursue, what we should value, and how we should live our lives out on a day-to-day basis. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the system. So when we look at specific examples of how does this play out, we're looking at, right, that part of the system is that in order to generate massive wealth for the people who are at the top, for the people who own the means of production. So again, when we look at who has the most wealth in our system, who has the most wealth, who has the most access, who has the most privilege, we are looking at the people who literally, for generations and generations and generations and generations and generations, have owned the means of production. And this system of those who own the means of production then get to dictate how everybody in society lives is as old as time. This has been basically how it's been since we stopped being people who lived in community and worked together. And as soon as we started inventing power structures, this was how the power structure was invented. The people who were able to exert some sort of power over how we obtained resources and how those resources were manufactured and how they were distributed. When you could be in control of that, you were essentially like a parent to the group of people you were overseeing. They then depended upon you for the things, the food, the shelter, the protection, the medicine, the whatever it was that they needed to survive. And in having that power, when you have the power to say, you are going to be able to work, you are not going to be able to work, you are going to get your needs met today, you are not going to get your needs met today, based on how I'm feeling, based on what I want, based on what value systems I want you to follow. The people under them had very little recourse in terms of being able to shift or change things, because in doing so, it was a threat to their lives. And we still live in a culture that is very much like that. Okay? The people who are at the top of our systems completely control law, government, the way goods are consumed, the way goods are produced, the way they're distributed, and the ways that we have generated abundance for those at the top of the system has been through a system of exploitation. If we just look at it for how it is, we just take a step back and we look at how our systems work, right? It started way back, even before America, before the Western world. It started with imperialism. It started with kings and queens having militaries, using force, hoarding the goods and services for themselves, and therefore dictating, if you follow me, if you follow my rule, if you do what I want you to do, if you are good and faithful servants to me, you will be rewarded with either not being punished and having your needs met, or if you oppose me, you will face the threat of violence. You will face the threat of having what you want and what you need taken from you, right? Like, we look at the story of Galileo just as an example. He spoke out against the ruling class at the time, right? He was speaking out against the structures of Christianity, which again were being used as manipulation tools to convince people that being meek, being mild, following the instructions of the leaders who had the divine right to rule was the one and true way to be a good person. It was the one and true way to get into heaven. They were like not even messing with just, it's the one and true way to get your needs met on our planet right here, right now. But they were telling people that it was literally the reason that you were going to get into heaven or not. That's what being a good person was. They were literally, this is my point, telling people what to see as a virtue. They were telling people, this is what you are to see, to perceive, to believe, makes you somebody who is good, is to be meek, is to be mild, is to follow the leader, is to do your service, not complain, to take abuse and say nothing about it. That was the cultural dictate at the time. And Galileo comes out and says, okay, I don't think the earth is in the center. I think the sun is. And that goes against the biblical teaching, which might then make people doubt the biblical teachings. And if the people doubt the biblical teachings, they might start to doubt the value systems that we're telling them to live under. To doubt that being meek and mild and taking abuse and doing all these things is what being a virtuous person is. And so what did they do? They threw him in prison. They tried to remove his rights. They removed his bodily autonomy. Because they had the power to do that. That's what a power structure is. Do you see what I'm saying? In order to quell dissent, they resorted to acts of violence against people's physical lives in order to keep people living in alignment with the value system that ultimately served them. Because the more people believed that what it is to be virtuous, what it is to be good, what it is to be someone who's going to get into heaven, what it is to be someone who's going to get your needs met, who's going to be able to get a job, who's going to be able to work, who's going to be able to not get thrown into prison, is to follow along with what the leadership says. And what the leadership said was all about how do we hoard the most for ourselves off of the labor and off of the backs of everyone around us. We send everyone else into battle. We send everyone else into the fields. We send everyone else to do all the work. We decide what we want for ourselves. We take way more than our fair share. And everyone's just supposed to be okay with that because religious law says that that's what makes you a good person. You see? This started way before the Western world. And then, of course, the Western world, we had slavery. We had literal, you people are less than human. You are going to do all the work. You are going to do all the labor. So we don't have to pay you. We don't pay you. We then generate goods and services that the population need via your labor, and you distribute it, you do all the work to get it to them, we get all the profits and pay none of the expense of the creation of it, none of the expense of the distribution. How did they get rich? Well, there you go. They didn't pay their workers. They exploited the consumer into believing that things had a higher value than they actually did. And we still live in that system today. So we may not have it as direct slavery, obviously. Things are not how they were for the actual African slave trade. However, we still have a situation where people can go to work a full day's work, and still not make enough money to pay for food, clothing, and shelter. We still have people who can go to work, do a service that needs to be done. They can be a janitor. They can be working at a grocery store. They can be working these low level, okay, again, think about this, a culturally dictated, a system's value, that these jobs are low value, low skill, and therefore it is reasonable and acceptable for people to put in a full day's work at these jobs that need to get done for society to function, that are absolutely integral to our well-being as a functioning society, but that don't require that you have sacrificed money and time and effort to go to university or get a degree or have one of these high-level jobs, and therefore it is okay that we underpay these people for their time and their service. They don't get health care, they don't get benefits, they don't get all these things. So we can have all of that profit at their expense, and then society will turn around and say, well, you don't have enough because you're low level. You're not a high level earner. You're not a high level person. That is exploitation. That is a culture of being indoctrinated to value certain jobs over other jobs versus looking at how reality actually functions. And again, right? So many of our low-level jobs, the people who bag our groceries, the people who grow and distribute our food, the people who clean and maintain the roads, the people who are janitors, nurses, teachers, all these low-level, low-skill jobs where you can literally work a full day's work doing a service that if you did not do it, if we did not do it, if we did not have garbage men, if we did not have these people, society would fall apart. It would not be good. And we say that is low level. It doesn't matter. We can exploit these people, and it is their own fault that they live in poverty. It is their own fault that they don't have enough. It is their own fault that they then go into crime or go into whatever to try to make a life for themselves. We look at people who live in parts of the world and parts of the country who have very little investment in their education systems, who have low access to food, who have low access to resources, who have antagonism by government bodies. And rather than saying they are being exploited, they are not being given a fair chance, we say, look at those criminals, don't become like them. We are being conditioned to see things this way, so that when the structures, the people who are in positions of power, abuse in order to stay in power, we say, blame the people who are being victimized. Blame the people who are fighting for themselves against a system that is completely antagonizing them. Because they are the bad guys. And they deserve to have less than what they need and to be in a position of scarcity, constantly antagonized. And everyone else who's born into safe neighborhoods, who has access to education, who has access to resources and healthcare and upward mobility, those are the good people. Those are the high-level people. The people who had parents who could pay for them to go to university. Those are the upstanding people in our society. The ones who had a reasonable education growing up and access to upward mobility. We immediately say that just by the nature and the virtue of where they were born and what they look like, and how society values that they are inherently better people. The way the justice system treats addiction in people who come from certain backgrounds is completely different. Right? Like, unfortunately, a white man addicted to cocaine gets to go to rehab. Gets to go to a luxury rehab in California where he has a specific diet that he gets to follow, and he's treated like, I'm so sorry this happened to you. A poor person addicted to heroin, addicted to cocaine, is at best pitied and at worst villainized and feared and incarcerated with no chance of rehabilitation. And then their labor is used in prison for free. It is exploited for the people at the top of the system. And we are culturally trained to see this as being okay. You see? This is what I'm talking about when I say we have been conditioned to value what we value and to see the world the way that we see it. Because again, if we are to question the system, if we are to stand up against the system, if we are to say, wait, this isn't how this should be, for a lot of people, we need to understand this makes us inherently unsafe. People who speak out, even just on social media, against the power structure, absolutely get censored. They have the power to diminish your reach and how many people are going to see the message that you're sending. Because they control the resources. They control how social media runs. But worse than that, like way, way more important than that, people's bodily autonomy, people's bodily safety is threatened over and over and over again in our system when you don't toe the line. Just think about that. When you're not going along with what is the acceptable, appropriate behavior, you can be fired from your job. You can be blacklisted. You can have trouble finding employment in general because corporations don't want to associate with things that you have said that go against the hand that feeds them. Think about that. To protest against something can mean going to prison. It can mean losing your freedom. It can mean, right, you don't have access to work anymore. It can mean violence. This is a huge deal. So when we can start to understand that, again, when we start to change our value system, when we start to see the system for how it actually is, the exploitation, the ways in which it is not fair, the ways in which we are being trained to value hyperconsumption, overproduction, individualism at all cost, lack of community, seeing certain jobs as high level and certain jobs as low level, being okay with the way that people are punished in our system through violence, through having their bodily autonomy removed from them, the way addicts and people who literally move into states of desperation are treated as lesser than citizens, as opposed to people who are trying the best for themselves to survive in a world where they are not supported. The way we are trained to see that the solution to our problems is more money, more wealth, more individualism. This is how we all are indoctrinated into participating in and perpetuating a system that is inherently set up to be against our humanity. Because to see it, number one, is incredibly difficult because it's normal. It's normal. It's the water we're swimming in. It's what we've been trained to believe is how things should be. People should be punished. People should be paid less than minimum wage. We should celebrate the people who were privileged at the expense of the people who were not. We should not operate in community and see people who are disabled, people who are mentally ill, people who are addicted, people who are in situations of crime right now as equal members of our society, equally deserving of love, compassion, and rehabilitation. Rather, we are trained to see them as evil threats. And they are literally used as, see, if you fall out of line, you will become like that. Keep doing what we tell you to do. Keep aligning with the system. Keep being what we think makes us have the most profit with the least amount of expense, so that you don't become like that. We are trained to shame, blame, and belittle the people who are being exploited the most in our culture. And we are trained to fear them, that we might become them one day if we don't keep ourselves in line by going with the system. And then the biggest thing about this is that the main reason that most people who are going to be listening to this kind of content are perpetuating the system and not seeing that they're doing it is because we are culturally conditioned to shame, blame, and guilt ourselves for any part of ourselves that is not able to go along with the systems of hyperconsumption, hyperproduction, and hyperindividuality that benefit those who are at the top of the system. We are trained to see ourselves as weak, failing, not good enough, never having enough, never doing enough, never fitting in enough, never good enough, isolated, alone, we're bad, we're wrong, we're horrible. We are trained to see ourselves as less than, constantly. Okay? This is our culture of manufactured discontent. We are continually sent messages of, you don't have the right clothes, you don't have the right body, you didn't achieve the right amount of things this year, you don't have enough money, you don't have enough friends, you don't have enough security, you don't have enough whatever. If you have anxiety, depression, any mental health disorder, what's wrong with you? You are broken. You are faulty. And then again, even that, the solution of therapy and medication and all of these things that sometimes help, sometimes just indoctrinate us into the system even more, are all behind paywalls. You have to already be at the top of the system in order to be able to afford the support. We are in a system where so much of these things that we are shaming ourselves about, our chronic fatigue, our feeling not good enough, our anxiety, depression, the ways in which we are struggling in a system that is anti-humane, that separates us from community, that asks us to work way more than is what is required or healthy, that makes it so that access to healthy food and places to go and exercise outside and breathe and have relaxation and not being constantly bombarded and stimulated with advertisements and you should be doing this and you should be doing that and you should be on this and you should be on that. You have to already be rich to even have access to that. Right? We live in a classist society, whether we want to believe it or not. And so you don't have access to all those things. You are inherently going to suffer. And then you are going to be blamed in the ways that you use coping mechanisms, the ways in which you are exhausted, the ways in which maybe you are, not emotionally stable. You're going to be blamed for that. There's something wrong with you. Instead of maybe you're responding exactly in alignment with how a life, right? How a life is going to respond to those unideal conditions. When we look at a flower that isn't growing, we don't say what's wrong with the flower. The first thing we check is the environment. Is the pot too small? Is there not enough sun? Is there too much sun? Is there not enough water? Is it the wrong type of soil? We don't expect a specific type of plant that thrives in moist, dark soil with 2 hours of sunlight a day to thrive in the desert. We would never say a flower that is meant for soil and 2 hours of sun a day is faulty and shitty because it can't survive in the desert. But that's exactly what we're doing to human beings. When we have a reasonable response of anxiety, depression, struggling, not feeling good in our systems of isolation, constantly being told that we're not enough, constantly being told that what we have and what we've accomplished is not enough, not good enough. We don't have reasonable community and connection. We're afraid for ourselves all the time. And instead of saying, yeah, we're responding to that. Our anxiety, our depression, our coping mechanisms, the way we numb, our addictions, they are at least in part. I'm not saying that all of this is always that, right? There are definitely chemical imbalances. There are definitely other causes of these things. But in part, it might be a response to an unhealthy system. We are instead conditioned to say, what's wrong with you? Shame, blame, guilt, fix yourself. And then the spirituality, self-help, and personal growth world comes in and says, yes, exactly. You have a broken brain. You're not manifesting right. You're not in your high vibration. I can teach you how to fix these things with my $444.44 masterclass. They sell you, I can teach you how to be rich and independent and positive and sparkly, aka I can teach you how to win at this system, and just think that you're being spiritual while you're doing it. And they sell that as the solution. They sell that as though it's some sort of alternative to the system. Instead of like, no, that is the system. That is literally the system. I can teach you to be in alignment, and then you'll be wealthy and healthy and have everything you want. Right? We are conditioned to believe that wealth is the answer to everything. So that those who are the most wealthy can continue to hoard and go, well, you could have it too if you just worked hard enough. And that's a complete lie. It's a complete fiction. If you weren't already born into a part of society where you have upward mobility, chances of you ever becoming rich in your life are like slim to none. Doesn't matter how hard you work. Right? The survivorship bias stories of the 1 in a million people who get out, those are used as the carrot on the stick to prove that it's possible, so that everyone will continue to shame themselves who's not already there, and will continue to invest in the system, sacrificing themselves to work and labor that is unfair and exploitative to try to get themselves into a place where they have money, because having money is literally the only way to be safe in our system. But the truth is that if you aren't already born into a situation where that's possible, you're probably not going to get there. And then again, we say that that's fine. We say that it's fine, that if you're rich, you literally live in a different universe than if you're poor. And if you're poor, it's your fault. And we don't look at the system because, again, it's the water we're swimming in. We're trained to see it as normal. We're trained to see poor people literally as scum of the earth who are doing it to themselves. Who, if they just worked hard enough, they would get somewhere else. Because that's what those at the top of the system want us to believe. And then those of us in the middle who do have enough, who don't need to take more for ourselves, who do have some power to shift the system by waking up to it and changing the way we consume and produce, because we have the wiggle room to do so, don't. because we're so busy navel gazing and trying to fix ourselves and going to therapy and doing all these things to try to become these ascended, transcended light beings who never have pain and never struggle and never go through anything ever again. Because we're not understanding where our pain is even coming from. We're not understanding what the actual root of it is. We're not understanding how indoctrinated we are to have shame, blame, and guilt be the thing that drives everything that we do. We're not understanding that we are being conditioned to be in a system that is constantly taking from us and then telling us that it is our fault that we feel depleted and shitty, that we don't have time to be a voice for the people who don't have a voice. We don't have time or energy or resources left over to do something different. We're so busy. Do I have the right clothes? Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing enough therapy? Am I awakened enough? Am I having the right Kundalini experiences? Thinking that this is the solution to our problem. No, it is not. The solution to our problems, for those of us in the middle who can genuinely say we have a relative level of safety in our society, is to start to deconstruct. Why do I have shame the way that I have shame? Why do I have guilt the way that I have guilt? What are the values I've been trained to value? What things have I been trained to see as good and right and holy, and what makes me a good person, and who does that benefit? What if my anxiety, my depression, my coping mechanisms, the way that I scapegoat and numb, the ways that I have less than ideal emotional intelligence, the way that I interact in my relationships, what if all of these things are not something that's wrong with me, but are parts of myself that need to be loved and understood and nourished and seen for what they are? Parts of myself that are doing the best that they can to survive within this system that I've been indoctrinated into, that's totally anti-humane. How can I start to heal this relationship I have with myself that tells me to be in a constant state of self-improvement so that I can find my enough? And number one, stop. Literally, if all of us who are in the middle here said, I don't need anymore, I have enough, I'm relatively able to buy the things that I need, I can have a reasonable home, it doesn't need to be a mansion, I have a reasonable home, I can have food, I can buy clothes when I need them, not every micro season. I can put a little bit of money away for the future. I have some leisure time. That's enough. I don't need to go for more. If all of us did that, literally our economy would crash. Because we would stop working so hard. And we would stop over consuming. And no corporation could continue to function if we did that. And then the whole structure would have to change. And it would start with us unpacking our shame, blame, and guilt around how it doesn't actually feel good to continue to try to keep up with this system of not enough and manufactured discontent. This is why the Mystery School, there's an entire year-long curriculum on dealing with your shame, blame, and guilt. Because for so many of us, it is so deeply ingrained that the reason we're in pain is because there's something wrong with us, and that the answer to our pain is to conform to the system more. to achieve more, to ascend more, to do more spiritual things, to get more money, to work harder. I'm not living my purpose. I need more clothes. I need more spiritual activation, da da da. When the reality is, no, you need to learn how to like yourself for who you actually are. We need to learn how to start having actual relationships. Real, true, genuine connection, not superficial connection. That's just, how are you going to help me in my career? We need to start to divest from the excessive consumption and production of our systems. And that work will shift the way you see reality. When you stop living from a place of my pain is a constant message that there's something wrong with me, and you start to say, why might I be in pain? Is it possible that I'm the flower in the desert? And it's not that I'm broken, bad, wrong, and shameful, that I feel like shit. But it's because the environment is shitty. And when we can start to, again, pull away from the things we don't need to be investing in. It doesn't even require that we do a whole bunch of protesting or going against. You can literally just stop. Stop buying clothes. Stop buying clothes you don't need. Stop watching TV. Just don't do it. Start knitting. Literally. Start taking time to just enjoy your life. Where you have the space. Instead of thinking, okay, well, I gotta be doing more. I gotta do. Start investing in your relationships. And especially the relationships that go beyond just your nuclear family. Start feeling what it feels like to have a real support system so that you don't feel so dependent on the system for everything. Even this idea that we're supposed to all find a primary partner who's then supposed to be everything for us is so toxically unhealthy. And yet, again, we're trained to literally pity people who don't have a significant other, as though that is going to be the reason you're miserable, because the nuclear family is the one and only thing that fulfills us. But that's just another way that we are kept divided and dependent on the system. And I'm just fighting for me and my own. And then we feel like shit, we feel alone, we feel afraid. And then when we're told, well, you just need to work harder and you need to consume more things, we're like, yes, okay, I will do it. And then the people who are being exploited are being blamed, they're being made invisible, and the system just keeps perpetuating itself. Our shame and our blame and our guilt as people who have enough is how we are indoctrinated into perpetuating the system of exploitation, of inequality, of values that don't make any sense, of valuing people and things that have no value. Because again, if janitors and maintenance people and grocery clerks all quit their jobs tomorrow, society would really suffer. If celebrities and sports people quit their jobs tomorrow, the people who make gabillions of dollars a year, all stopped, we'd be fine. And yet, who do we value more? We named Taylor Swift Person of the Year. When what did she do? She flew around in a private jet, probably contributing to more fossil fuel burning than any single individual all year round, putting on concerts so people could zone out and consume goods and burn more fossil fuels when there are people who researched cancer? There are people who made medical breakthroughs. There are people who funded impoverished nations to having more health care. There are people who built wells. There are people who mothered their children all year on needing to work 2 jobs because they're single moms and there's no one to help them. But that's what we value. And we wonder why we feel empty. Because the value systems we have make no sense. They make no sense other than they keep the rich rich at the expense of everyone else. And this is why we live in the world that we live in. So again, dealing with our root shame. Our bodies aren't good enough. We don't have enough money. We're not beautiful enough. We're not successful enough. We're not independent enough. We're not living life right by this, that standard. We have anxiety and depression. We have mental illness. We have addiction. And all of these things are a sign that there's something inherently wrong with us. That is where we need to start as people who are in the middle. That is why the self-love path is the foundation for shifting how society functions. It's not just about getting to a place where you like yourself, which is incredibly important. And I want to make that clear. You deserve that. You deserve to have self-love. You deserve to have the ability to have compassion with yourself. You deserve to feel like you are a good enough, valuable human being for existing. If that is all you get out of your self-love practice, that is not an insignificant thing at all. And we need to understand that it will set you free from being in a state of constant navel-gazing, constant shame, constant blame, so you can see the bigger picture and how you're participating in it unwillingly, and it's not your fault. You did not create the system. You did not create the value systems. You did not choose it. It is not your fault. And that's part of, as we deal with the guilt and the shame and the blame, we start to be able to say, okay, no, this is not my fault. I'm not a bad person that I have had these backwards value systems, that I have perpetuated, that, yeah, those people deserve the punishment they're getting, and yeah, I've participated in all these things, and I've overconsumed, and I've overproduced, and I've done all these things. I've contributed to the harm. We are able to then look at that and say, okay, it's true, and I'm not a bad person. I'm not evil. I didn't do it on purpose. I was indoctrinated into it. Now, what can I do differently now that I know? We become mature enough that our blame and our shame and our guilt doesn't then just trap us in more navel gazing. But we can start to say, okay, how can I be a part of the change? I see it now. And so where I'm participating in it, how can I participate in it less? That's where my power is. It's not just a new thing to shame myself about. Okay? Those of us in the middle are being indoctrinated and conditioned to perpetuate the system through shame and guilt. This is why shame and guilt are always lies. You are not good enough is always a lie. And it is deep, deep, deep nervous system work to move past this and to get to a place where we start to be able to see what is actually valuable, what is not, how the systems behave, and how we can start to behave differently. That's why this work of self-love is not just navel-gazing. It changes everything. It changes the way that we see everything. And then we start to realize that, yeah, like, we're all going to have limits. because the system is very powerful. And it does have the power to literally exert violence on us. It has the power to take away our bodily autonomy and our freedom, our ability to get a job. So we have to work with that. We have to see that for how it is. And it's going to change the way that we see those who we have perceived as disposable people in our society for what they really are. It'll change the way we see who and what is valuable and what isn't. It changes everything. So you working on your shame, blame, and guilt is the liberation portal to a changed society. Unpacking the way that you have been conditioned to value what you value by people who have a vested interest in you valuing those things so that they maintain their positions of power. That is how we get out of this. So, that's what I had to say today. It's hard because we are being dictated how to see by the people who control the resources, by the people who get to determine if we are going to be safe or not. We have been trained to shame ourselves instead of look at the system. And it is hard work to get to the other side. That's why I have a mystery school. That's why I do one-on-one coaching. That's why there are lots of other people doing this. I'm not the only resource. But get help. Watch all my videos. I have so many videos on YouTube. I have so many blogs on my website. I do one-on-one coaching. I have a mystery school. All of it is designed for this purpose, to help us break out of this. Okay? It's not just about navel gazing. It's about becoming people who can actually change the system because we see how it works from the bottom. Okay. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I hope this was helpful. And I will see you next week.